Okay, so last time we talked about this idea of the social impact of being the first one to win something, of the first black man to win X, the first white woman to compete in the Olympics, the first whatever to do something in athletics, and how that could have a huge sociological impact by showing and visually demonstrating to society that this could be achieved. We could climb Mount Everest. We could run a 4-minute mile. We could do any of these things. So that's the first. And a lot of those preconceived notions were around race and ethnicity and all of these things that get back to this idea of genetics, and that some groups have some sort of genetic advantage. So in this lecture, what we're going to do in this series of videos, what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you a bunch of things, and by the end of this series of videos, you should be able to compare and contrast race and ethnicity. These are two things that people use interchangeably, but they're actually different, and they're different in very important ways. And by the end of this lecture, you should be able to tell us how they're different. You should be able to state Bergmann's rule and Allen's rule. These are two really cool things that exist across animal species that tell us why an animal takes a specific shape based on its environment. You should be able to explain the relationship between malaria and the sickle cell trait. That's going to be an interesting and a proposed hypothesis for something that's really cool. You should be able to state that hypothesis, the Morrison hypothesis. And this is a hypothesis as to why athletes coming from Jamaica are great sprinters. And so Morrison came up with this. He's a Jamaican medical professional who came up with this hypothesis as to why there's so many great Jamaican sprinters. You should be able to name a gene that's different in sprint athletes than endurance athletes. You should be able to describe something called the aerobic predictor. What the aerobic predictor is this really cool thing that was discovered by a friend of mine who's a Scottish guy who basically showed that if you have a certain genetic profile, you don't get an increase in aerobic capacity when you do endurance exercise. Most people, when they start exercising, they get better at exercising. But there's a small cohort of individuals who don't actually get better. And by the end of this, you should be able to name a gene that predisposes you for tendon injury. And again, all of this is around this idea of our genetics are going to be something that are going to affect our performance. And so one of the things that this is really coming back to is this idea of going from the first to achieve something. Like we talked about, Jesse Owens was this incredible athlete who was the first one to win 4 gold medals. And really, when we go back and we look at black men winning the 100 meters as an example in the Olympics, you go from the first, somebody very early on, and that's this huge sociological moment, to, well, yes, he won, but he had a genetic advantage. Because now what you have to do is, when it comes from being the first to achieve something to being the next to achieve something, if it's always a single group that wins, now there's this question that arises that, oh, it's not that that individual was working so hard and doing all of this training, it's that they have a genetic advantage. And now it actually turns the corner to say, no, you didn't work that hard. You just are a genetically gifted athlete. And that's really, really a very slippery slope, because we have to acknowledge that there are great athletes. But if we just say that, oh, the only reason that she won is because she's from this group that has genetically gifted athletes, that really minimizes what that individual put into it. And there's not really good scientific evidence that we can do that.